So I'm going to hand over to Craig for some real life examples. Craig, I'm going to be your human clicker. So you're just going to have to say click each time you need me to move on. Okay. So we've got an example of 6 systems here. I will hand over to you. I'll stop talking now.
Okay, thank you, Taz. I believe that that should make you Tinkerbell based on the little books I used to read with an audio tape to go with it. So what we wanted to talk about here, again, as I said earlier, this is an e-commerce retail focused example, but the only reason I picked that was because I got 6 systems to play with. What I really want you to think about in the next few slides is, do I have some systems that have a particular pattern of data integration? So the first pattern we're going to talk about is product and pricing information. And I think of that as a pattern where you have a master system and that data needs to flow out to multiple other systems. So in this example, our ERP is holding our product and pricing information. You know, that could equally be 2 systems. You might have a pricing system and a PIM, but let's say that it's an ERP here. It needs to send to the POS and to the e-commerce system. Keep going, Taz. And to the WMS, because if you think about it, all 3 of those systems use some or all of that product and pricing information that's sitting in the ERP. Okay. The next, so that example there was a single source of data being broadcast in different ways to multiple targets. When we're thinking on the next slide about inventory and stock management, there are 2 systems that own the on-the-ground control of your stock. Your WMS owns what's happening in the warehouse, and your point of sale owns what's happening on the shop floor. But that means that your one more click, please, Taz. Your ERP and your e-commerce system, which both might need to know your stock position for what you're selling, are both going to need to take feeds that are combined from those 2 things. I'm not saying this is the only pattern to do it, by the way. You know, there's maybe the ERP could feed the e-commerce system after it's done some transformations. But the idea that I wanted to talk about in this example is that you may find within your business sets of data that have 2 sources of truth that need to be combined. They're each authoritative for their own bit of the data. In this case, it's stock levels. And it's going to need to come together and then potentially be published to 1 or more other systems. Okay. Customer and contact information, keep pressing until we got the arrows there. Thanks, Tess. Okay. In this example, we've actually got multiple systems that might be interested in keeping customer and contact information in sync. Obviously, if this was a more B2B example, we might have, maybe our TMS needs to know the locations of all my EDI customers and keep those in sync for delivery points and that sort of thing. But in a retail example, your CRM is probably your primary master data. Maybe your customers can come in and send updates via the e-commerce platform. Maybe they can go into store and update the POS. It could be direct to the CRM. Often POSs talk via the ERP because they get brought together, but then that means a flow of updates back and forth with the ERP. And maybe you've got a subscription management tool that's also just controlling when users subscribe and unsubscribe to keep that master data up to date. If you think of that as a set of individual integrations, it's actually really hard. Your CRM is designed to be a master of customer information. It's not necessarily designed to manage the coupling of data that goes around. And what I mean by that is, it's very easy. I've seen in the past where an update from one system causes an update in another system, which gets flagged as an update, and you can end up with ongoing loops of updates going through. So the middleware needs to have some logic to say, well, actually, I need to suppress that update. That's not a change that needs to get published back to a system. And similarly, there might be only subsets of the data which a given system is allowed to update. What that probably touches on is an idea where State Lake as middleware plays in a different space to what you might do in a bank or a very, very large enterprise. In a bank, you can customize every application as much as you want. Usually, in lesser organizations, we try and avoid customization, and we try and say the more vanilla I stay, the more out of the box and the more configuration I use rather than customization, the easier it will be to manage the life cycle of my applications as they upgrade and change over time with the vendors that I'm working with. The reason that State Lake middleware can help you with that is it allows you to say, I will talk to each of the systems in your enterprise in the way that best suits it. I won't force you to customize it. I won't force you to get multiple vendors to all write custom API or file integrations. But State Lake, by sitting in the middle and using the unique State Lake design where we can use the stage design to store and forward data and transform, we can actually simplify those things. So in the logical diagrams that you saw before, there were arrows going all over the place. But practically speaking, State Lake would take one feed of information from the WMS, for example, store it, and then be able to forward it in different formats with different cadences to different target systems. Similarly, when State Lake is managing the synchronization between multiple systems using customer data, you're able to say, what are the rules I want to decide whether a given system is authoritative for a piece of information? And when I receive an update, how does the middleware will take care of knowing that that update shouldn't be echoed back to the source system and potentially trigger another loop of changes?
And if you remember, again, last month, Brett mentioned with the Villa Maria system, they are looking at replacing their ERP. So instead of them having to redo all of the point-to-point integration, because they have a central hub there, all they have to do is rebuild the one point and away you go, rather than having to rebuild all the systems that their ERP talks to. And then this is another pattern that's really common that we see in our customer environment. So I've called this slide multiple systems and best of breed systems for a reason. It's really common that there is a business and there's an existing CRM system or an accounting system or an ERP system, and then that business gets merged with another business. Or another example of this is so Volvo is a good example of this. There is a local subsidiary, well, Volvo New Zealand, and there is a global Volvo head office. And the HQ requires that information to be managed in a different system, Salesforce in this example. But that's not always ideal for the local subsidiary. So Volvo has got 11 different sales and service centers, about 80 salespeople that work in those places, and they all use a system called Autoplay, and they have been for many years. So they need to kind of bridge a gap. So, and they want to avoid re-rolling out the same system that doesn't improve business process in any significant way. Local staff need to still use a system that they know and love and is actually right for them. It's best of breed for them. But using that integration layer in between allows them to use both those CRM systems almost side by side, but have the data that they need in the right system. So even if you are swapping out systems, for example, it's actually really good if you're trying to do parallel processing and migrating across one process at a time, or one batch of employees at a time, or one batch of a chart of accounts at a time, to do it systematically and run two systems in parallel without having to worry about where the data is and where's the master source, because the middleware can manage a lot of that stuff for you. So,
and just one last thing I'd add on that previous slide, even if you don't need to run systems in parallel, remember that middleware could be your answer for migrating the data between your systems. So when you're putting in a new ERP, you might have parallel running, you might have feeds of data syncing up between those two systems. You might also use the middleware to run the migration, because a middleware migration is a package that you can build, test, and rerun. Whereas doing spreadsheet or manual dumps is a process that your team have to be very on top of their game if they're going to manage to do it consistently. And for example, there might be cleanup rules and so forth. Use the middleware. It's a pattern I've seen used successfully many times with middleware over the years, to remove one component of an architecture like this and replace it.